The private VIP maternity ward was drenched in harsh white light, every surface gleaming with clinical perfection, yet nothing about the moment felt clean or gentle. The sharp smell of antiseptic burned Isla Morgan's senses as machines beeped relentlessly beside her, each sound echoing her weakening heartbeat. Her body trembled, soaked in sweat, veins screaming as another wave of pain tore through her. She cried out, fingers clutching the sheets, fighting with everything she had left to bring life into the world. One cry pierced the air, then another, then a third, 3 fragile, desperate wails slicing through the silence. Triplets. 3 lives born within seconds, tiny miracles announced by trembling voices. Nurses moved quickly, voices urgent but controlled, lifting the newborns, checking vitals, wrapping them in soft blankets. Isla barely managed to turn her head. Her vision blurred, but she caught flashes of tiny fists, wrinkled faces, and soft, damp hair. Tears slid down her temples, not only from the agony her body had endured, but from a deep, gnawing fear she couldn't name. She reached out weakly, hands shaking, desperate to touch them, to make sure they were real. Across the room stood her husband, Caleb Blackwood. Perfectly tailored suit. Immaculate shoes. The powerful CEO of Blackwood International looked untouched by the chaos he had helped create. His face held no pride, no relief, no tenderness. Only impatience flickered in his cold eyes, as if this moment were an inconvenience delaying his real life. Minutes after the final stitch, while Isla still bled and drifted in and out of consciousness, Caleb stepped forward and placed a thin folder on her bedside table. Divorce papers. His voice was calm, clinical, stripped of emotion as he spoke of mistakes, liabilities, and ruined plans. Nurses froze, stunned into silence. Isla wondered if exhaustion had finally broken her mind. Caleb signed without hesitation, informed her his lawyers would handle everything, and walked out without looking back. 3 newborns cried. A woman lay shattered. And far away, unseen and unknown, destiny was rewriting everything. The marriage had never been equal, though Isla Morgan only understood that truth in fragments at first. She came from a quiet, modest life, raised to value kindness and effort over appearances. She was intelligent, warm, and once full of ambition, dreaming of a future in medical research where she could help people who were often overlooked. Caleb Blackwood entered her life like a promise wrapped in elegance. They met at a charity gala where she volunteered, her simple dress standing out among silk and diamonds. He noticed her gentleness, her sincerity, and for a time, he seemed captivated by it. Their courtship was swift and dazzling. Private dinners, international trips, whispered vows about partnership and respect. The world praised her luck for marrying a powerful CEO. But after the wedding, the admiration faded. The man she married became distant, critical, and calculating. Decisions were no longer discussed, they were delivered. Her opinions were brushed aside. Her dreams were called impractical. Slowly, subtly, her world shrank. Caleb preferred her silent, polished, and compliant. He discouraged her from working, from maintaining friendships, from being anything other than the woman on his arm. Publicly, he played the devoted husband. Privately, he reminded her how replaceable she was, how dependent she had become. Isla learned to swallow her words, to endure loneliness behind luxurious walls. The pregnancy exposed the cracks beyond repair. When doctors confirmed triplets, Caleb's reaction wasn't joy but irritation. He spoke of risks, appearances, and inheritance complications. He suggested solutions she couldn't accept. From that moment, the house grew colder. Separate rooms. Sharp arguments. His infidelities no longer hidden. Yet Isla stayed, protecting the lives growing inside her, believing endurance was the price of motherhood, never imagining how close she was to freedom. Isla drifted in and out of consciousness as the room slowly quieted. The nurse's footsteps faded, the machines softened to a distant rhythm, and exhaustion dragged her under like a heavy tide. Time lost its meaning. Somewhere between shallow breaths and blurred dreams, her phone vibrated endlessly on the small table beside her bed, the screen lighting up with missed calls she couldn't see and messages she would not read. Miles away, in a private medical facility hidden behind iron gates and old trees, an entirely different life was coming to an end. Theodore Morgan lay still, his breathing shallow, his once sharp eyes fixed on nothing. For decades, the world had speculated about the mysterious billionaire who vanished from public life, his fortune scattered through layered trusts and silent partnerships. Few knew where he lived. Fewer still knew who he truly was. In his final years, only one person visited him without expectation or curiosity about money. Isla. She believed him to be a lonely, forgotten old man with no family left. She brought him books, listened to his stories, held his hand when pain stole his strength. She never asked questions. She never searched his name. To Theodore, that kindness was worth more than every empire he had built. As his heart slowed, lawyers waited in an adjacent room, documents already prepared. With his final breath, a sealed protocol activated. Ownership shifted silently across continents. Shares transferred. Accounts unlocked. Control of shipping routes, technology firms, medical research labs, and real estate portfolios changed hands in seconds. Back in the maternity ward, Isla stirred weakly, unaware that while she lay abandoned and broken, fate had quietly crowned her. At the very moment she was losing everything she thought defined her life, she had inherited a fortune vast enough to redefine the world around her. Isla was discharged earlier than expected, her body still aching, her steps unsteady as she was wheeled through the hospital corridors. There were no flowers waiting, no concerned husband pacing nearby, no celebration for the birth of 3 healthy children. The silence felt heavier than the pain in her body. A nurse carefully placed the babies beside her, offering a tight, sympathetic smile that said more than words ever could. Caleb did not come back. Instead, a message arrived from his legal team, cold and precise, stating he wanted no custody and would provide minimal child support to avoid unnecessary publicity. The ride home was quiet. Isla stared out the window, holding back tears as the city moved on like nothing had happened. She didn't return to the mansion. That place no longer felt safe. Instead, she went to a small apartment she had secretly kept, a place she once considered an escape but now called survival. The walls were bare, the rooms modest, yet it was the first place in months where she could breathe without judgment. Nights were the hardest. She fed the babies in the dark, rocking them gently, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She cried silently, afraid her brokenness might somehow reach them. Exhaustion pressed down on her, but love kept her awake. Then, one quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang. A sharply dressed woman stood outside, composed and authoritative. She introduced herself as Evelyn Cross and asked to speak privately. As Evelyn explained who she represented and why she was there, Isla felt her knees weaken. The truth unfolded slowly, carefully. The same day she was discarded, she had inherited everything. Isla looked down at her children, her voice trembling as she whispered, "They'll never make us beg again." Evelyn returned the next morning with documents, tablets, and a quiet gravity that filled the small apartment. She spoke gently, but every word carried weight. The inheritance was not a rumor or a misunderstanding. It was absolute. Isla Morgan was now the controlling authority of Morgan Holdings, a network of corporations spread across continents, hidden behind layers of discretion and legal protection. Trusts had already been established in the names of the triplets, ironclad and unreachable by any external claim. The numbers Evelyn mentioned felt unreal, too large to grasp, as if she were speaking in another language. Isla listened in silence, her newborn son sleeping against her chest while the other 2 rested nearby. She felt disconnected from the figures, the power, the sudden shift in status. Only hours ago, she had been a discarded wife with nowhere to turn. Now she was being told no court, no individual, not even Caleb Blackwood, could threaten her future again. Security teams were on standby. Medical coverage was permanent. Every need her children could ever have was already guaranteed. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her eyes stopping when she recognized familiar company names. Logistics firms. Financial institutions. supply chains that supported industries worldwide. One name stood out sharply, tightening something in her chest. Blackwood International. She looked up slowly, meeting Evelyn's gaze. "Is he connected to this?" she asked quietly. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She nodded once. She explained how Blackwood International depended heavily on silent partnerships and funding streams routed through Morgan Holdings. Caleb had benefited for years without ever knowing whose shadow he stood in. His success, his power, his arrogance had been built unknowingly on the foundation Isla now owned. A long silence followed. Isla looked down at her children, her expression changing, not with anger, but with clarity. For the first time since the hospital, her fear loosened its grip. She closed the folder carefully and said, steady and certain, "Then I need to learn everything." The months that followed transformed Isla in ways no mirror could fully capture. Her body healed slowly, scars fading as strength returned, but her mind sharpened with every passing day. She surrounded herself with experts, financial advisors, legal strategists, security consultants, yet she refused to hand over control. She listened, asked questions, studied late into the night while her children slept nearby. Between feedings and lullabies, she learned balance sheets, market behavior, and the quiet language of power. Knowledge became her armor. Despite the resources at her disposal, Isla insisted on raising her children herself. Nannies were present, security discreet, but motherhood remained hers. She wanted them to grow in warmth, not isolation, to know love before privilege. Every decision she made was filtered through their future. She no longer moved in fear. She moved with purpose. Her return to the public world was carefully timed. When she finally appeared at a closed-door investors' meeting, the room stilled. Gone was the subdued woman known only as a CEO's wife. In her place stood someone composed, articulate, and unshakable. She spoke with clarity, not arrogance, and commanded attention without raising her voice. Executives who underestimated her quickly realized their mistake. Under her direction, failing divisions were restructured, exploitative contracts dissolved, and entire sectors redirected toward sustainable growth. Hospitals received funding. Maternal health care initiatives expanded quietly but rapidly. The press began to notice patterns, whispering about the unseen force behind several bold decisions shaping the market. They called her the Silent Empress, a name she neither confirmed nor denied. Miles away, Caleb watched headlines scroll across his screen, unease tightening his chest. The woman shaping these changes felt disturbingly familiar. When he finally saw her image attached to a financial report, recognition struck hard. Isla was no longer invisible. She was inevitable. Caleb Blackwood's world began to fracture in ways he had never imagined. Initially, he attempted casual outreach, brief emails, careful calls, vague invitations to reconnect, all measured to seem concerned yet nonchalant. When Isla ignored him, he increased the intensity, sending messages that mixed regret with subtle flattery, reminders of shared history, and vague promises of reconciliation. Each attempt was met with silence. He could not comprehend why she would not respond, why the woman he thought he had discarded so easily refused even a single conversation. Behind the polished veneer of his corporate life, cracks were forming. Blackwood International relied heavily on Morgan Holdings for critical funding and logistics. Isla's quiet control over these assets meant that even small shifts in her decisions began to ripple across his company. Stock prices wavered. Partnerships stalled. Investors whispered questions he could not answer. Every time he thought he had contained the situation, another setback emerged, and he could trace every failure back to her. The realization struck him slowly, painfully. He had thrown away a woman he believed powerless, only to discover she held not just a fortune, but the levers of his success. Every advantage he had assumed as his own had been built, unknowingly, atop her inherited empire. Panic replaced arrogance. Confidence crumbled. Caleb began to watch her moves obsessively, attempting to anticipate her next step, but she no longer operated within his control or expectations. Anger simmered, but it was powerless against her composure. Isla did not retaliate aggressively, she acted with precision. Her calm authority only magnified his desperation. Caleb realized, too late, that she had transformed into someone untouchable, not through wealth alone, but through clarity, strategic foresight, and the undeniable moral high ground of having endured betrayal with grace. Every attempt he made to regain influence only emphasized his weakness, and he could feel the weight of his own misjudgment crushing him, day by day. The public reckoning came sooner than Caleb expected, and it was far more humiliating than any private confrontation could have been. The venue was an international business summit, filled with the world's most influential financiers, executives, and media representatives. Isla arrived not as a timid, overlooked wife, but as a commanding figure whose presence alone silenced conversations. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing her poised expression, her subtle elegance, and the aura of authority she exuded without effort. Every movement, every word, carried weight. Caleb, seated in the front row, felt the shift immediately. For years, he had assumed he dominated every room he entered. But as Isla took the stage, that assumption crumbled. She spoke first of vision, responsibility, and the obligation leaders had to protect those they served. Her speech was measured, articulate, and devoid of bitterness. Yet the underlying message was unmistakable: power misused comes with consequences. She announced a merger, a strategic realignment that would redirect investments and partnerships, most notably excluding Blackwood International from critical contracts. The flash of realization crossed Caleb's face as journalists and investors whispered, recording every word. He tried to interject, to remind the room of his influence, but it was futile. Isla controlled the narrative, and the world followed her lead. Social media exploded within hours, headlines splashed her decisions across financial news platforms. Silent Empress outmaneuvers CEO ex-husband, read one article. Betrayal meets poise, Isla Morgan rewrites the rules of power, read another. Every post, every tweet, reinforced her dominance and his impotence. Caleb watched, powerless, as the empire he thought untouchable faltered under the weight of his own arrogance and her strategic mastery. Investors began questioning Blackwood International's stability. Partners hesitated. Deals that once seemed guaranteed now slipped through his fingers. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be overshadowed, outmaneuvered, and publicly humiliated. Isla had not only reclaimed her life, she had redefined it on a global stage, leaving him to grapple with the consequences of his choices in full view of the world. Isla never sought revenge for the sake of vengeance. Every action she took was measured, calculated, and guided by clarity rather than anger. She ensured that Caleb's legal obligations were fulfilled, that her children's welfare was guaranteed, and that the future she now controlled was secure. She did not destroy him financially or publicly beyond what was necessary to assert her rightful authority. Instead, she established boundaries, enforced contracts, and implemented safeguards that protected her family from any further intrusion. Her decisions were precise. Blackwood International faced scrutiny not because she wanted to punish Caleb, but because the systems he relied upon were now under her jurisdiction. She quietly redirected resources, restructured collaborations, and ensured that her companies operated ethically and efficiently. Her victories were strategic, creating stability for her children rather than chaos for her ex-husband. At home, Isla reveled in the quiet triumphs that no headlines could capture. She watched her triplets grow healthy and strong, teaching them resilience, compassion, and intelligence. She took pride in guiding them through their first steps, first words, and first lessons about the world, a world they would inherit in a far more secure and loving environment than she had known. Caleb, meanwhile, was left to confront the full weight of his choices. His regret was a constant, gnawing presence, and he could do nothing to undo the consequences of his actions. He had underestimated Isla's strength, her intelligence, and her capacity to rise above betrayal. She had emerged unbroken, empowered, and unshakable. Every attempt he might make to regain control or influence would be met with calm authority, ensuring that the life he once discarded remained firmly beyond his reach. In this way, Isla's justice was complete, not through vengeance, but through mastery of her own destiny, the unwavering protection of her children, and the quiet but undeniable demonstration that strength, integrity, and strategic wisdom were far more powerful than spite. The final scene unfolded in the quiet of her apartment, now transformed into a home that blended warmth with understated elegance. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the city skyline visible through the expansive windows. Isla sat in a comfortable armchair, one of the triplets asleep on her lap, another nestled against her shoulder, and the third resting in a nearby bassinet. The soft rhythm of their breathing filled the room, a gentle reminder of everything she had endured and everything she had gained. She looked out at the sprawling city she now held pieces of, a vast empire that had once been unimaginable to her. Yet wealth alone did not define her triumph. What mattered most was the freedom she had carved for herself and her children, the ability to make choices without fear, to shape lives with compassion and wisdom, and to reclaim every ounce of dignity that had been stripped from her in those first harrowing moments at the hospital. Her mind drifted back to that night, the sterile light, the pain, the betrayal, and the cold indifference of the man who had once vowed to stand by her. A quiet smile touched her lips. She had survived, yes, but more than that, she had risen. She had transformed grief into strength, abandonment into independence, and despair into power. The world had underestimated her, but she had rewritten the rules on her own terms. In the distance, the city lights began to twinkle as night fell. Isla took a deep breath, her hand resting gently on her children, feeling the weight of responsibility yet also the buoyancy of hope. She was no longer a passive participant in life, she was its architect. The 3 little lives before her represented not just her legacy, but a promise that love, courage, and resilience could overcome any betrayal. She whispered softly, almost to herself, almost to the universe, "We are unstoppable." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of life and the soft warmth of her children, Isla Morgan knew she had claimed not just her empire, but her destiny. The woman who had been discarded at birth's cruelest hour now ruled her world, with heart, mind, and unshakable resolve.